This podcast is brought to you by WRFL, Radio Free Lexington. Find us online at wrfl.fm. Catch us on your FM radio while you're in Central Kentucky at 88.1 FM all the way to the left. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to subscribe.
Hi, welcome to From the Woods, Kentucky. I'm Lhotka, and I'm here with my co-host, Renee Williams. And today in studio, we have Dr. John Lhotka, and he's an associate professor of silviculture in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky. It's a pleasure to have you in studio today.
Thanks for having me.
And before we get started talking about your research in silviculture, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do here at UK.
I'm an associate professor here in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, and I do teaching and research in areas of undergraduate forestry as well as aspects of silviculture.
Okay. All right, so what first got you interested in forestry?
Well, I grew up in a small rural community in Illinois, surrounded by cornfields, so we didn't have a lot of forests where I grew up, and I went off to college interested in agriculture, and it sort of just found me.
Okay.
And learning about forests and how they work and their benefits. And
here you are today, right?
That's good. Well, thank you for telling us about that. And now today our topic is on silviculture. So tell us, what is silviculture?
Well, silviculture, the term comes from Latin silva, which means forest, and culture means as in growing. So that's just like agriculture. Silviculture is basically growing of trees.
Okay.
The more technical definition would be, it is an art and a science of controlling the establishment, composition, structure, and growth of a forest stand to meet landowner objectives on a sustainable basis. While that's a pretty heavy definition, there are three components of that are important. One is that silviculture is manipulative, meaning we are altering the forest to change it in a direction that benefits our objectives, and those objectives can be from production of wood products to management of wildlife habitat to water quality, whatever our human objectives are. And the other part that is that it's sustainable. We're looking for improving the forest to the future. It's different than practices that may be exploitive and just extracting products. We're actually looking for ensuring we get the right trees to grow in the future and that we're not setting ourselves up for a long-term issue in that location.
Okay. All right, so what do you find interesting about silviculture and the research that you do?
I like that it builds on a lot of different topic areas. It draws from a whole wide variety of disciplines within forestry and more broadly, such as the ecology and physiology of how trees work, soil properties and how that can affect growth, how we do measurements of forests to see how they're progressing, the economics behind it all, and as well as the social science. So it's an integrative subdiscipline within forestry that helps us manage these forests. But it helps you draw a lot of information together and make the right decision about a particular piece of property and based on the landowner's needs.
Okay. So tell us, for example, I know that you teach a silviculture class. What would you kind of introduce your students to the concepts are? So kind of introduce our listeners to some of these concepts that you have in silviculture.
So silviculture, there's a variety of tools we use as managers, and these tools can be categorized into different time periods within a forest rotation. So a rotation is the time period from which a forest establishes through when it serves either economic purpose of being harvested or mature, where it starts to decline naturally. But during those times, at different phases of its development, you have different activities you can do to the forest to improve it. And these tools fall into categories such as intermediate silviculture treatments.
And what would that be?
Would be like forest thinning, where you're reducing density of unwanted species and to help improve the growth and health of the trees that are left. Can be to help better recruit trees of a desired species.
Like, for instance, if you just wanted to manage for oak or something like that. Is that what you're meaning?
Yeah, you would be able to basically select for the desired species of your objective, and knowing what their growth patterns are, you can change the forest resource availability, such as light, to get them to grow better.
Oh, okay.
The other part of this story is that once a forest reaches the end of this rotation, you need to think about regeneration of a new forest. That can occur using natural regeneration or artificial regeneration. Natural regeneration is simply the use of natural seeds that are out there in the forest, or existing small trees, which are called seedlings and saplings, after forest canopy is removed. And the artificial regeneration is the planting of trees following that. And most of what we use in our region of Kentucky and hardwoods generally across the eastern U.S. is natural regeneration. These forests regenerate very well on their own. In fact, if you have a harvest activity or a tornado or some disturbance that's going to remove the forest canopy, you're going to get trees back. That's just how these forests work. Probably more trees than you need. But what silviculture is about getting the right trees, what species are important, such as our oak and hickory forests that are very important economically and ecologically, and that those forests take more tending on our part after these kind of events based on the characteristics of oak itself.
And so you mentioned those are forests that take a little bit more attention and tending to. What are some of the things that you have to do to get them to grow and be successful?
Well, historically, oaks relied on disturbance, such as landscape level fire or other events, to help them regenerate. They're disturbance dependent. If a forest is left alone for a long period of time, they don't develop the seeds and saplings that they need. Their forest will transition to other species, later successional species like maple, beeches, those sort of types of trees that do well in the shaded understory. Oak needs more light, and these activities historically would have regenerated. And we can manipulate the forest canopy through regeneration practices like the shelterwood method, which gradually removes the overstory canopy or in a sequence of events to help gradually add light resources to make these seedlings become competitive after after the overstory is removed.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about why you might want oak versus some of those other tree species that you were mentioning?
Well, there are a lot of commercial species, that we rely on. Oaks are very important for a number of key sectors of the forest economy. One that we're particularly interested in now and is having more issues with regeneration is white oak. And white oak is, of course, very important in an industry that is central to our state. The distilling industry, which relies on white oak barrels for all of their production. White oak is also used in a variety of other products, veneer for furniture, a variety of lumber products. And so white oak also has a lot of benefits ecologically, in the sense that it produces a lot of wildlife mast. Mast is the acorns that come off annually and that produce energy for animals. It has some important things, such as bark that exfoliates off, flakes off, where bats can actually roost in. So it's a tree that has a variety of benefits. There are of course, the state tree of Kentucky is yellow poplar, another commercially important tree, but it doesn't have quite the ecological benefits of some of the factors that oak have, given that it's a small seeded tree that doesn't produce a lot of habitat food.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so can you talk about some of your oak research that you're working on?
So the oak research we have ongoing here at UK, as well as more broadly in the region, is that we're looking at all aspects of the forest rotation in oak. How to make sure that oak can go from a seedling through its normal lifespan and then be regenerated and be replaced by another oak. So we have work ongoing with ways of harvesting the forest that would allow the right conditions to occur where oak develops and can compete for light and space. So when the forest is, say, regenerated, you have a lot of individual species and a lot of high number of trees competing for all of those resources, and we can do things to manipulate forests at that time, or later in the middle of a rotation, such as thinning, to help provide better conditions for them to grow.
And I know you work with some of our wildlife faculty as well. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the importance of silviculture and other people, the benefits to the wildlife and some of that research that's going on?
So certain wildlife species need habitat conditions, such as the forest canopy, how open it is, how much space is there from the ground to the forest canopy. That most specifically worked recently with bats and how we can manipulate forests to regenerate oak, but also perhaps enhance their ability to forage and move around in the forest canopy. And so there's a variety of ways that when you change a forest canopy, make it more open, it allows the understory to respond more light, creates more insects, more browse. So there's a variety of feedbacks on that. And certain wildlife species require very specific habitat. The rough grouse is another important species in the region. Requires young, early successional forests. So larger open areas of harvest are important for that kind of brushy stage of forest development that these birds like to live in.
So are there some animals that will only live in oak, or are they not that particular as far as trees?
Well, there are certainly a lot of charismatic animals like the black bear, the wild turkey, the white-tailed deer that consume a lot of acorns, and that represents a big, important food source for them in the fall ahead of the winter months where browse and other things can be more limited.
So with some of your research, can you tell us about some of the tools that you use to either measure the light that's coming in, just what you're doing to conduct the research, and how do you gather that information?
So yeah, one of the important parts about silviculture is being able to document what the current conditions or characteristics of the forest are, how we can change that to move it in a direction that we want. And we do use a lot of different techniques, from simply measuring how many trees there are, measuring their diameter in a circular plot with a tape measure, to using LiDAR, where we can map forest canopies using laser technology from the aircraft. We use photography to understand the amount of openness in a canopy. We can directly measure the amount of available sunlight, which can be linked to important information of tree physiology. So we try to leverage all the different technology we can to understand the interactions between what the forest conditions are, and how many trees there are, how they're distributed along the ground and vertically, and then how that impacts the environment for trees growing.
And I know too, one thing I've seen, you take tree cores and do some tree ring analysis, and that's a way to measure, I guess, the success of the light that's coming in, or your treatments that you've done for it.
Yeah, so tree ring analysis is you're taking a small core about the size of a pencil out of a tree, and it gives you the annual rings of the tree, and so you can see the growth response of this tree through its entire lifespan, providing a lot more detailed information on long-lived species that we can't document in our careers. And so we're able to look at how they respond to disturbance, ice storms, droughts, as well as how we are manipulating the forest through silviculture. So we can see growth response, we can look at growth conditions that would lead to mortality, and it's a pretty good way to reconstruct how forests have developed, their age structure, and that can give us an idea about how forests that established a long time, more than 100 years ago, how that came to be, and how we can mimic what happened at that time to regenerate that forest similarly today.
So besides cutting a tree down, is there any other way besides coring a tree to find out how old it is?
Well, the core is actually, it's called an increment borer, and it's a device that has sort of a drill bit on the end, but it's hollow in the middle, so that as you push it, turn it into the tree it has a handle on it. You turn it into the tree, and you're able to just extract that tiniest bit of wood, and almost very little of actual living tissue. The cambium is the outer part of the tree that's the living xylem and phloem, and very little of that is extracted, and it grows over that small wound within a year normally. So it's a it doesn't kill the tree, and we're able to extract all that data and information and help us better understand these long-lived species that are difficult to follow in any of our lifetimes.
And so what about, I know you have graduate students working with you. What are some of the projects that you have ongoing with some of them that you're working on?
Well, right now I have a graduate student working on thinning in white oak, so understanding how we can reduce direct competitors that are directly adjacent to white oak trees to help make them grow faster, have better ability to produce massed crops, wood for timber production. I have students working on issues related to reforestation of surface mounds, which is very different than management of upland oak natural forests, but it's a way that artificial regeneration is used in the region to help rehabilitate these areas. We can also look at different means of patterns and procedures for creating openings in forests to regenerate them, and I've had a number of students work on a variety of oak regeneration projects, trying to refine different practices in our toolbox that we can meet current objectives with.
You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome to Wildlife Sounds from the Forest. This is Dr. Matt Springer. I'm an Assistant Extension Professor of Wildlife Management within the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources here at University of Kentucky. I'm here to teach you a little bit about the animals that live in our forests, especially those here in Kentucky. For those of you who might just be joining us, each week we'll play a wildlife sound from our forest. Here's our sound for this week. Stay tuned. Towards the end of the show, we'll talk about this animal and why it is making that sound.
Welcome back to From the Woods, Kentucky. Let's get back to our interview.
So a lot of this information that you've been talking about, you teach in your classes, is that right?
Yes. We have a class on our campus called Silviculture, and it's basically a 4-hour class with a lecture and lab that covers the topics, introduces students to what silviculture is, reviews how trees actually grow, how stands develop, and then how those ecological principles and patterns can be used to understand these different practices and how we can manipulate forests.
Now, can anyone take that class, or is it you have to be a forestry student to take that class?
I think it's open. Those that are interested in the topic, I think, and willing to learn.
So we have students out there that might be listening to this as well. So
yeah, we've had students from a variety of majors take it, and it's a pretty good introduction to the process of forests and how they respond to both natural and human changes to them.
And I know you have a lab with that course. Where do you guys go out for the lab, and what do you cover in that?
Well, the lab, there's a lot of kind of hands-on activities at silviculture, inventorying forests, marking forests, so meaning that identifying which trees we retain and what we remove, and we do that locally. We spend a lot of time in Berea College Forest, which is just south of Lexington, has a 9,000-acre forest that we've partnered with a lot on research as well as education, and it's an opportunity for students to be able to look at how our diverse landscape can impact what species grow where, how that affects site productivity, and then how we can assess an area, determine what the path forward is based on what we have found its conditions are and what the landowner would like us to do, and then write a silvicultural plan that's able to be communicated well to the landowner, and then timeline can be developed to how that would unfold in the future.
Okay. So how many acres do you typically have your students working on?
Well, I
Or
teach
is there not a typical number?
I teach a senior class, our forestry capstone project, and usually these groups of 3 to 5 students have to assess 100 acres or so of woodland, and that provides them a good opportunity to see some diverse types of forests and conditions, and allows them to really understand that there is no one practice that we have to use across all of our forests, that they're so diverse, and that we need to understand what that diversity is and how each one may need to be treated differently, and which forest practices are most appropriate for this important variation we have out there.
And they interact with the landowner as well. Can you talk a little bit about that, like trying to understand the landowner objectives that the students have to do?
That would be a good training for them.
Yeah, and so one of the most important things as I opened this up about the definition of silviculture is it's all objective driven. So it's fundamental to the discipline to understand what the landowners want, and that can be a private landowner who owns 25 acres in Kentucky, could be the national forest, which everyone in the U.S. are landowners of. So there's a variety of scales at which this landownership occurs and the objectives occur. But in any case, the students, we have them in these capstone projects meet with the individual landowners, interview them about what their future needs are, what their interests are. Are they interested in wildlife? Are they interested in recreational values, production of wood products, and earning money from your forest, and that sort of thing. So it really means a sit down with the landowner, and a lot of times the process of presenting a management plan is also educating the landowner on what his or her forest is like, what the realities of getting to their objective are with their current forest.
So you've presented us with a lot of great information today, and we appreciate you coming in. What would be 1 or 2 takeaway items that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think silviculture is a very interesting discipline, as I said before, because it integrates a lot of different knowledge bases, from forest ecology to understanding how site relationships with soils and measurements, etc. But it's also important to say that it's what we're trying to do in research and management of our forests is very science-based. We're trying to understand how these forest systems work, and in the best we can. With that said, there is an art to this, in the sense that we don't have all the information. We are challenged by the fact that trees are very long-lived organisms, and these forests take a long time to respond to our activities, and in many cases, people who perform them, don't actually get to see the very long-term outcomes. And so that it's exciting in the sense that we're applying science, but we also learn through our own personal experiences. So I tell students that when they leave here, they're only going to become better at knowing forestry and silviculture as their careers unfold, because a lot of it is experience in the site you work in, and having that ability to practice the art aspects while knowing all the science behind it. But there is a lot of information you need to gather through experience in the field, and that to me makes it exciting. That it leaves it up to the individual to have put their own strengths towards that, and make their mark and helping better our forests.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Lhotka, for joining us today. We greatly appreciate you coming. If you'd like more information on what you've heard on this segment of today's show, visit our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org. Stay tuned now for Wildlife Sounds from the Forest.
Welcome back to Wildlife Sounds from the Forest. I'm Dr. Matt Springer, Assistant Extension Wildlife Professor in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. Before I tell you what that sound was you heard at the beginning of the show, let's play it again for you.
Okay, for once, I think most folks will know what that sound is.
Yes, so that's our crow, right? Our American crow, a common sight and sound in Lexington.
Right.
There's
See a lot of them right now.
right, and do you know what the group of crows is called?
I don't.
Really?
No.
Oh, there's all
I probably
those
do
jokes.
if when you tell me.
So you always, I passed that group of crows back there. It must have been a murder.
Yes. Yes.
The horrible jokes that associate with those.
Yes.
So we have murders in town. We actually have one just off campus. It's fun to talk like that.
Use it 11. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So groups of crows are a common thing. They're a social animal. They have a wide range of vocalizations. They change their pitch, their frequency, the volume, the sense of urgency. So that all kind of leads into the way they can really understand what's going on. And the simple caw can be changed quite a bit for them to express their interests.
So, you have any idea on why the pure black?
No idea why they're pure black.
Okay.
Yeah, not an expert in crow evolution.
Crow evolution.
So,
so how big are they?
They're about 14 inches tall. They do range in size. They're a couple pounds. They are much smaller than their cousin, the raven, which we have in Kentucky, which sounds more like this. A little bit more of a growl. And the ravens are much more associated with the cliffs, bluff lines that we see more in eastern Kentucky. We actually, on Paul Van Boeven, part of University of Kentucky's campus in southeast Kentucky in Robinson Forest, we have a nesting raven pair that's been down there for quite a few years. But yeah, the ravens are a little bit bigger and actually probably a little bit more vocal than the crows, maybe. I mean, but they're definitely larger. Both are super intelligent birds. I don't know if you've ever seen the crows in the UK that will put the nuts on the roads and the walkways that get them run over so they can get access to the food.
That.
Yeah.
Oh, that is smart.
Yes, they are smart. And they're one of the species that can recognize mortality, and they potentially have funerals per se when they lose a member. Yeah, they're a very interesting and complex group of birds.
It sounds like it. So how many young do they have?
So they'll nest once a year, and usually they have a pair or 3 young eggs. We do have localized populations that don't necessarily travel. And then there's also a migrating version of them that you'll see them bounce around quite a bit more. Usually your urban birds, they can find enough food that they'll stick around, and they do eat a wide range of food. They do play cleanup crew on the roads for roadkill. They'll get in trash cans, but they'll do things like go after sweet corn in your vegetable gardens, those kind of things as well, which gets them into trouble.
All right. So I've noticed here lately you see large numbers of them.
Yes.
Is that one of their
traits? So they will get into larger groups, especially in the winter, and then break off a little bit more when they start making their nests and raising their young. And the migrating birds usually do migrate in larger groups. So we may have an influx of migrants that just came through.
Okay. So you said there was a pair of them at Robinson Forest of ravens.
Yes.
And so do they stay together, the male and the female?
That group has been there for several years. The family members will actually stay fairly close. So same with crows in many ways. They actually have the ability to identify individuals by their calls.
Really?
And that's for territory, to let people know they're there. They can identify the individual to that, and also family members. But it gets into the defense mechanisms of territories as well with their neighbors and being able to know if their neighbor's still around or not. Can I go raid his food supply?
Okay, so you said that they group, but as in families, so they stay together?
Some of the family groups will stick around, especially during the summer when raising young and whatnot. I'm not so sure if they'll family, usually what ends up happening is to avoid inbreeding, they'll leave to make sure that they don't start, sticking around too much and getting confused on who they should be nesting with. So I'm not quite sure how far they would disperse from that, but Usually the site fidelity for the adults is, I believe, something that does happen, which is where they stick around and nest in the same place year after year if they've had success.
Okay, well, so speaking of nests, up in trees, do they build nests like
up
robins?
In trees, so crows are tree nesters. Ravens are more the cliffline bluff nesters.
So do they create big nests like...
Not like a eagle
or anything like that?
No, they're much smaller than that. But they're
a lot bigger than a robin.
Bigger than a robin mud pile, yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for coming in today. We appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you for joining us today, and we have a new show schedule for spring 2019. You can listen to us live on WRFL 88.1 FM on Mondays from 11 a.m. to noon. And if you missed the Monday shows, you can listen to our podcasts on our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this podcast from WRFL Lexington, you may enjoy our live radio stream at WRFL.FM and, of course, via radio at 88.1 FM in the Central Kentucky area. We have a wide variety of programs you're sure to enjoy. Just go to WRFL.FM/schedule and see what programs appeal most to you. Thanks again for listening to this podcast from WRFL Lexington.